Welcome to Our Ventura TV. My name is Nicole van Dam, and we are so fortunate to have with us today John Moore, who is the editor of the Ventura County Star. Welcome, John, and thank you for coming.
My pleasure, Nicole. Thank you.
John, when did you start with the Ventura County Star?
I started at the Star in 1998, and I've been editor of the Star since 2011.
How has journalism changed since then?
Tremendously. It's like a whole new world. When I started, we were just beginning into the world of internet and digital publication. We were doing some of it, but everybody was on slow speed, dial-up, and it was hard to get information, pictures. Nobody was doing video. And now that's how people are consuming information, far more so than in print. They're consuming it on digital, and we're on every platform we can think of, and social media to get the word out to folks in the platform that they want to consume it in.
So are you also responsible for the internet and mobile as well as the paper format?
Absolutely. My responsibility really has to do primarily with, if you will, the creation of the content. So what we spend most of our time on is deciding what stories to cover, what photos to take, what video to take, and then from there we make sure they get distributed on all the different platforms.
So now you're taking video as well as still photography. Does that mean you're sending film crews out there?
Nope, it's the same reporter who had the little reporter's notebook 20 years ago now has primarily an iPhone for most of the reporters, and they're using that to take photos, to do video, and to send it back. All of our photographers have upgraded cameras that they can do video at the same time they do still photos, and most of that is sent in to us, dropped to us directly from the field. So you can shoot it right now, drop it in, we process, put it up on our webpage, so now we can cover news as it happens anywhere.
So are the lines starting to blur then between paper format and the internet and broadcast news?
To a certain extent, although I do think that broadcast news, a traditional TV station primarily, has a different focus than we do, so that they are still looking at packaging their information in more segments, 30-minute segment, and presenting it that way. We're a little more looking at the individual story, getting that story out. Basically, we cover news all day, every day, 24/7, and then at the end of the day, we look at what we did during this day, repackage that for print. So instead of print driving it, we let the news of the day, our coverage drive what we do, and then determine how it gets put into the newspaper that arrives tomorrow morning.
So has the definition of what's a news day changed?
Yes, when I started in this business, which was a long time ago, we all worked toward a deadline, and the deadline was built around when the presses ran. And so you knew you were working up until that moment when you had to stop working because the presses started to run, and you couldn't go beyond that. So everything was built around that time frame, and that's how all reporters work. Now, in effect, we tell people that you have a deadline right now. Your deadline is constant. And even if you're working a story and the presses start to run, you may continue working that story into the middle of the night if that's what the story deserves.
And so in terms of your day, you walk into this huge newsroom with like 100 desks, just like in the movies.
That's right.
And then what happens?
So one of the wonderful things about my job and the wonderful things about my day is I don't have a clue what happens next. And it's really what remains terribly exciting about what I do is that I cannot predict, and I don't think I want to predict what a news day looks like. So some days are somewhat boring in regard to other days, and it really depends on what is happening in the world, what is happening in our community, as to how I spend my day and how our staff spends their day in terms of what you're reporting, who's doing the work, when they're doing it, and how they're doing it.
Do you have a morning meeting to send journalists out, or how does that work?
So we start our day we have a meeting at 8:30 where we sort of evaluate what we know everyone is working on during the day. We review what happened overnight. We take a long look at our numbers. We have numbers that we never used to have just as a print publication alone, that we know how many stories people read, how long they were on stories, where they came from to read the stories. All that sort of metrics out of our digital publications, mobile and for the website, really help us understand what people are interested in, and that helps our conversation in terms of the story that we do that day. So we'll map out what everybody's doing, and then of course if news happens at 9 o'clock, that all changes and we start all over again.
In terms of your digital and being able to see what's popular, what's not, what is your most popular story throughout time?
So the one that we have that is, there's a definition of that they call a long tail, which is a story that you do that has an interest over a very long period of time. The story that probably fits that best for us is a story we did back in 2007, and it was on Vivian Cash, Johnny Cash's first wife. She lived here in Ventura County, and her children were raised here. And Johnny Cash lived here until they divorced, and he moved on with June Carter. And this story was about Vivian shortly after her death and about the book she had just written. Wonderful piece written by one of our writers at the time. We published it. It has had a lot of traffic over the years. And for whatever reason, through the magic of Google, it now, if you go on Google and do a search for Johnny Cash's wife, it is the first story that comes up on the first page of Google, out of 1 million stories, or however many that Google will show you. So it gets a lot of traffic from people who are searching for Johnny Cash's wife. And we've seen spikes in that traffic over the years. And what we found is that now that the movie Walk the Line is on cable TV, every time it gets shown on cable TV, the traffic on that story spikes. So it's kind of fun to watch that there still is interest, and literally from throughout the world, in reading that story.
And it shows how a Ventura paper now reaches internationally.
Absolutely, all over the world.
You know, to talk a bit broader about journalism, you know, there's some hot topics out there right now. Do you have any thoughts you can share on fake news?
So fake news, it's troublesome, I think, to me. It's troublesome to a lot of people within our industry because it's being used as a term to describe stories that you don't like. And most of the stories that are being classified today as fake news really are not fake news. They're simply stories that someone disagrees with or someone may challenge in terms of the accuracy of the story. But simply because you don't like it doesn't mean it's fake news. Fake news literally should be a description of stories that are made up, that someone just simply invented for no reason. I mean, I can tell you that if anybody in my newsroom ever invented a story or did a true fake news story, I would fire them on the spot. And I think that's true throughout our industry in this country, that if any editor or any publisher found a reporter who was literally doing fake news, who was making up a source, who was making up information, and there's a history of this, we would fire them because we can't tolerate that. What matters to us is that you as a reader have trust in what we're doing. You may not like the story. It may be in your eyes a negative story about whatever the topic or whatever the person may be. But what we have done before we publish that story, whether it's in print or whether it's the internet or wherever it may be, is we do our job in making sure that story is accurate, that story is true. And we talk to as many people as possible before we ever publish. We still do it. You may not like it. It may be classified as fake news, but it simply is not fake. And
do you have any advice for our viewers as consumers of news, how they could independently satisfy themselves whether or not necessarily a Ventura County Star story, but whether or not a story is fake news versus real news?
I think it's hard, and it's harder today. The internet is such that there are thousands of websites that pretend to be real news sources. And some of them are stories that are made up. And I think it's very difficult. It makes you as a consumer, it creates an obligation for you to not just read the headline, but to understand where that story came from. Even if your best friend put it up on Facebook, have an understanding of who wrote the story, where did it come from. If it was somebody that you don't recognize, from a news source you don't recognize, take one more step and check it out. It usually won't take very long for you to determine that it may not be a source you can trust. And I think as a consumer, what you need to do is go to sources that you know you can trust. You may not like, for instance, the New York Times, but the New York Times is a reputable news organization. And so that information, as they gather it, is information that goes through their entire process of reporting, editing, and vetting that is different than some kid writing a story simply because they thought it up.
And trust then is something that's very important. And I gather news organizations do steps to build it up over time?
It's what we call the coin of the realm. I mean, it's the most important thing I think we have is that you as a reader trust us. And we work very hard. We deal a lot with ethics. We deal a lot with our standards. I happen to be on a group currently within the USA Today network, which we are a part of, that deals with ethics and standards, and we have phone calls regularly. We have conversations in our newsroom because we understand that what's important to us is that you trust that we do exactly what I was talking about in terms of doing the job that we have. You aren't there. You don't see what we see. You don't talk to the people that we talk to. So you have to trust us that we did that job. That means we have to trust our reporters and our photographers to do their job. And it really comes down to, that's what we deal with every single day.
You know, another issue that requires trust is confidential news sources. Can you explain for our viewers why that exists? Sure. Is it important?
It's important within some circles. I was lucky early in my career. I spent about 5 years in Washington, D.C. working. And confidential news sources are very important within Washington, D.C. As you get away from the nation's capital, as you get away from New York City, you find that news organizations don't rely on them as much. Frankly, we use very few confidential sources that we actually publish directly the information. You have a lot of confidential sources who come to us with information. Then we go out and verify it through somebody that we can name, that we can put the name to, because I think it's important, if at all possible, for the reader to identify who said this. Where did the information come from? But at the same time, we understand, and we understand out of Washington, that there are times where a piece of information will not come to you unless the person can be guaranteed that they're not identified. Frankly, I believe it's overused, and I think it's overused on both sides of the equation, both from the media standpoint and particularly from the standpoint of the government officials. Rather than giving their name, they hide behind it. Recently, for instance, it was well known that the President of the United States had lunch with executives from a lot of the television stations. He talked to them, they came out and told everybody else what was said at the lunch, but they couldn't use his name. So he was called a senior administration official, even though everyone knew who was there and who said it. So it doesn't really do a lot of good, I think, in some regards. I would like to see fewer, but I understand the need for them.
And in terms of the role of journalism, what do you see as the role of journalism in the United States?
Well, I think it's critical, and one of the things that's happening today, but I think it's a long-term view of who journalists are and what journalism does, is that people do understand, despite the criticism of journalism, and some of the criticism is very valid, but they understand the importance of us being, in effect, the watchdog. That's probably the primary role that we have played and we will continue to play, because you can't go to the city council meeting, you can't talk to the members of Congress, you can't do some of the things that we do. It's our job. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to read the budget from the front to the back and to ask questions about why is this here, to hear information from people who are upset and concerned, and to investigate it. So we play that role on behalf of the public, and I think that obligation to represent you and then to dig through and find out what is happening, who's responsible, and to hold people accountable is something that is a treasured role on the part of journalists and journalism, and should and will continue.
And then looking a little narrower, what do you see as the role of the Ventura County Star in Ventura County?
Sure. The role of the Star, our role is really to do that, but to do that in a broader way. There are 10 cities in Ventura County, plus county government, lots of school districts. We are not in a position to really be there for all of them, but we spend a good deal of time talking to people who are connected to those agencies. In addition, we play a second role to help people understand their community. It used to be said that a good newspaper held up a mirror to the community, and I think we do that, and even more than that, we help people understand what their community is all about, and understand, as importantly, the people in their community. And one of the great things we do is just tell people stories. Because at the end of the day, what a good journalist does is tell a story. And a lot of them are just about interesting, fascinating people who happen to be our neighbors.
You know, unfortunately, we're just about out of time. Is there a website that people can go to learn more?
We would love to have you come and visit us at our website. It's vcstar.com. We also have an app, so if you're on mobile and want to download our app, you can go, it's free, and download the VC Star app. So we would love to have people, however they want to, buy the paper, have it delivered, look at us online, or look at our app.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, thank you. I love talking about what I do.
This is Nicole van Dam signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. I hope you found it to be front page newsworthy.